your presentation. Go ahead.
Hi, Suzanne. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. So my presentation is actually about expanding the user base for training events and training resources rather than just expanding the user base, which I know on some of the programs it said it had this title, and on others it just said expanding the user base. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So yes, thanks for inviting me. I'm Vanessa Higgins. I'm Director of User Support and Training for the UK Data Service. So I'm really going to give an outline of my experiences over the last 10 to 20 years, actually, of running training programs and delivering training events, and obviously delivering remote events. More in the last 2 years, but actually we've been doing that a lot since 2013 anyway. So it's a bit of a case study, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we do at the UK Data Service for those of you who don't know. So we're funded by the UK Economic and Social Research Council, which is one of the biggest funding bodies in the UK, and it funds social science research. And we hold a huge amount of social science research data, mostly from the UK, some international. So we provide access to that data, and we provide training on how to use that data. So the kinds of data that we're talking about are government surveys, so your big employment surveys, crime surveys, health surveys, census data, and other things like cohort studies, so studies that follow people over time. So these big important studies that are used in research and policy. So we provide training events, and we also provide online training resources. And I won't dwell on this, but these are the kinds of topics that we provide training in. So you've got the 3 columns. So we provide training in research data management, in how to go about finding and accessing the data that we hold, and also in using data. So using data is a really big section, actually, even though it's only 1 column. You can see all the different topics that we cover under there. So what we do is basic data skills training for social scientists. We don't get into the advanced statistical training or advanced coding. So it's very much that introductory level. And we also provide our secure lab training, which is quite a specific training course compared to the rest of the training that we do, which is for the most confidential data that we hold. And that's mandatory. That particular course is mandatory if you want to use that secure level data. Again, just an overview of the scope and the vast amount of training that we do, actually. So this is over a 2-year period, starting around the time of the pandemic. We held 228 events. So those were events that we hosted. We also spoke at many other events. And that we reached 12,500 people over that 2-year period. So to me, that's a lot of people. To some of you, it may not be a lot of people. I'm not sure who's here today. All our events during that period were remote. Prior to the pandemic, we had about 50% face-to-face, in-person events, and 50% remote. And we'd been running remote events for a long time before the pandemic, so we were well versed in it. And our audience is basically anyone who wants to come. It's all disciplines, all sectors. We're funded for social scientists, but we welcome anyone to come. It's not just academics, it's people from government, local government, central government, etc. So the first thing I wanted to say is we know that remote training increases the participation in training events. So if we look at the 2 columns, so you've got the April 2019 to March 2020 column, so that's pre-pandemic, when I said we're doing roughly 50-50 in-person and remote events. So if you actually look at the last row, because that's the most meaningful, the mean number of attendees was 27 per event. And skip 2 years later, I've skipped out of the pandemic year because that was a very unusual year and everything just spiked in terms of training. So I find April 21 to March 22 is more comparable. You can see that our mean number of attendees has increased to 43. And it's not, I can't say that this is purely down to remote training, because we don't run the same training events each year. So it may be that we ran some more popular events in that year, but it is quite a huge leap. So some of it is down to the remote nature. And we know that we're reaching different kinds of people as well from further analysis that we've done. So I also wanted to just introduce our online training resources. So we have a wealth of training materials in our learning hub, things like our data skills modules, and I've put one on the page there on the right. So those are interactive modules with quizzes and certificates at the end to introduce users to the data that we hold. So I'll get on to the main topic. So the ideas for expanding the training user base. These actually look very simplistic when I go through them, and you might think, yeah, well, I knew that, but these are my experiences over the last 20 years. And some of these will resonate with you, some of them won't, perhaps because you're in a different discipline. So take from it what you will. So my first advice would be to make it easy to find and use, so avoid barriers. So if you can avoid charging for events, if possible, don't charge for them. People are more likely to come to a free event. Open access, don't put things behind logins. So don't ask people to register for your online materials if you can avoid it. That puts people off. We ask people to register for events because we want to know who's coming. We have a very short registration form, and we use that really regularly to monitor who's coming and then trying to target hard to reach groups. So one thing that we've done recently, we thought we'd experiment with live streaming events from YouTube. So we've done that. So people can either join our events via registration or they can join via live streaming. And we found that 7% of attendees are joining via live streaming. So that could be, I'm assuming those 7% of people are people who we wouldn't have attracted if they had to register, but that might not be the case. It's hard to know. And one thing that was flagged by our midterm review from our funders, we're in 5-year funding cycles. So one thing that was flagged was that we have all this amazing training, but when they went out and interviewed people who were potential users of our service, not many people actually knew about our training. So over the last 2 years, we've really changed the website to increase the visibility of our training. And we've seen a spike in hits on our training resources as a result of that. So I think that's the first tip: make it easy to find and use, avoid barriers. My next tip is, again, a simple one: give the audience what they need. So listen to them and respond to their needs. So we carry out regular user experience work, regular user consultations, and we collect feedback from event forms at every event. So we've learnt from different sectors what they prefer, what formats they prefer, what the current trends are in what they want to see in terms of training, etc., just from listening to what they want and responding to their needs. Also, use a variety of formats to attract different audiences. So don't assume that everybody has the time or the inclination to attend a 3-day boot camp, intensive boot camp. Run some short events, run some long events. One of the things that we found from our user experience work was that undergraduates in particular like online training materials rather than training events. And if they're going to attend a training event, they want it to be short and snappy. And similarly, the voluntary sector, so the charitable sector, prefer online training materials. And then in terms of targeting hard to reach sectors, some examples are things like we don't get many undergraduates at our training events. So we held an undergraduate dissertation week last September, October time, and So we held a series of events, promotional activities, etc., over that week. And we had over 300 undergraduates attend those various events. So think about who you're not getting and how you might attract them. Similarly, when we did our user consultations with the voluntary sector, they said they would only attend events if it was really relevant to them, because they don't have the time, they don't have the resource to attend events. So, so we targeted events with, basically targeted them at the voluntary sector and had the voluntary sector in the title of the event. So just simple things like this. Another way of expanding the user base is to collaborate with external organisations so that you're tapping into their communities. So examples are other training networks. So within the UK, we have a community of practice, really, which is around social science data training resources. So it's all the people who are funded by our funding council who are involved in training, and we get together once every 3 months and share ideas, etc. And we also communicate, market each other's events. Other sectors as well, so government sectors, voluntary sector, as I've said, that will expand your user base. Interdisciplinary events and collaborations on materials will expand your user base, and also obviously other countries. So for example, we work a lot in the data service with CESDA. That's why I'm here. Okay. And then probably the most important thing, and I am certainly not a marketing expert, but the most important thing out of all of this is to communicate that you have training resources and training events, and communicate so much more than you feel comfortable with. So as I said, as a result of our midterm review, we looked at how we could improve our communications, our marketing processes around training. So we now have a quite intensive business as usual training marketing strategy. So we make sure that our comms team have a list of every event that's happening so that nothing is missed. And we plan marketing and promotion for every single event that we have. We have core marketing, we have bespoke promotion, so we have themed contact lists. So we'll have a bunch of contact lists on things like crime, or bunch on health, bunch on employment, etc. And we also do advanced scheduling of tweets for events and resources, so that nothing's getting missed, because we found that it was a bit piecemeal before we had this really stringent process. And then what I really want to talk about for the rest of the presentation is our communications campaign and how successful that was. So because of our midterm review, again, we launched a really intensive communications campaign between October 21 and February 22. And this involved a lot of things. I think it was more than what's actually on this slide. So it was a 5-month campaign. It built up momentum and traction as time went on. We produced lots of news stories about our training and about the people involved in our training as well. We had various podcasts go out about the training that we were delivering. We had, again, really worked on our social media. We had soundbite tweets highlighting our team's expertise, etc. And we worked with partners, as I've said. So we worked with CESDA and other partners. So we have something in the UK called the National Centre for Research Methods, which is really the main hub for all the research methods training in social science in the UK. And when our work was promoted through them, we noticed a huge spike in traffic on our website. So it's working with partners was a really big part of it. And then in February, we had an even more intensive month. I mean, this was a huge amount of work for everybody involved. and a good collaboration between the training team and the comms team. And we had a special training newsletter and several news stories within that month. And I'll show you the results of that on the next slide, the next few slides. So this is quite hard to believe. I'm still not quite sure I do believe it, that this is the number of page views of our training and events pages ranging from December 20 to March 22. Now, this big leap here is when our training campaign was. So from December 21, you can see that the hits of our training and events pages went up, continued to go up in January, and in our really intensive month, it went up hugely in February. And you can see there that, I mean, these are not small numbers. These have gone up from hits of in December to 2,500 hits on the website to 45,000 in February, which is an enormous leap. So that's what a training campaign can do for you, comms campaign can do for you. Again, that's our YouTube watch time. So you can see that the campaign was here in October and it's peaked, obviously, with a drop off at Christmas there. It peaked up in February, March, when our campaign was in its full throw. Again, our data skills modules, page views. So these are our online modules. You can see that compared to the December to April period, which was our campaign, compared with the previous year, there's a huge leap there as well, from 750 up to over 4,000 page views of just those resources, specific resources. And then translating that to number of attendees at the UKDS events, like I said, it's quite hard to monitor this because we don't run the same events each year. But what we do run each year are 2 sets of 18 workshops repeated in the spring and autumn. And they are the same workshops that we run each year. It's an introductory training series. So you can actually look at you can compare attendance numbers before the campaign and after the campaign. You can see that the numbers, the mean number of attendees per workshop has increased from 55 to 77. So I think overall, that's an enormous success of a training campaign. So I'm nearly out of time. So in summary, and I did say this was a simplistic view, remote training increases the reach of our training. It's out for discussion whether it increases the quality of the training, but that's perhaps another discussion. I think the 4 key things that I would take away are: make your training easy to find and use, avoid barriers, ensure your training meets the needs of diverse learners, collaborate to reach new communities, and the most important thing of all is communicate. So if you don't communicate about all the wonderful training that you do, then you're never going to expand your user base. And that's it.